On Wednesday and Thursday of this week, our preschool held its annual Christmas program right here in the sanctuary. It was notable for at least one reason, because everybody was sitting in the front and the back pews were empty. My hunch is it's because that was more fun to look at and be close to than this is. But kudos to the Schaefer family that's always right here with me in the front. But it's always fun to see the children and to hear their singing and to enjoy the results of the hard work that they and their teachers have put in to get ready for that program over the last few weeks. Robin and Lee down at the preschool and all the teachers and staff down there do a really good job. But what always makes me laugh, as it did this week, is the chaos that surrounds the whole event. The preschool staff plans very well for the Christmas program, but it never fails that things get a little crazy in spite of all the planning. Now, the children were fine. It was everybody else that was out of control. Parents crawled all over each other and even threw a couple of elbows trying to get the perfect angle for the perfect picture of their child. Younger siblings, babies cried and cooed and babbled and toddled. Parents got up to take their restless little ones for a walk around the sanctuary or even down the hall to the bathroom. The sound system kept hissing and loudly until we figured out which switches to flip. And Lee Williams was standing by with a bucket just in case somebody threw up. But all of that is actually pretty appropriate, considering that Christmas plans rarely go according to plan and can often be pretty messy. It's a common trope of Christmas movies. One of my favorites was National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Clark Griswold wants nothing more than to provide a fun old-fashioned family Christmas for his family. But his best-laid efforts are marred by a number of things, including but not limited to the unplanned visit of Cousin Eddie and his family, a highly anticipated bonus check that turns out to be a one-year subscription to the Jelly of the Month Club. Clark gets the gift that keeps on giving all year long. An incinerated Christmas tree and the surprise visitation of a potentially rabid squirrel. The movie Home Alone is another good example. The McAllister family has planned an epic Paris vacation for Christmas, but when the whole family oversleeps on the morning of their flight, in the rush to get to the airport, they accidentally leave 8-year-old Kevin behind to fend for himself. What results is not the perfect Parisian Christmas, but a desperate race by his mother to get back home, a ruined family trip, and a cartoonish battle with inept cat burglars. And don't even get me started on Die Hard. All John McClane wants is to go spend Christmas with his wife. And instead, he ends up having to fight single-handed 12 German terrorists who have taken over the Nakatomi Tower and are holding his wife hostage on Christmas Eve. Now, real-life Christmases rarely devolve into that kind of unmitigated chaos. But it's not at all unusual for carefully made plans to sometimes turn out much differently from what we had hoped when we made them. As the poet Robert Burns wrote, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And at no time is that more true than at Christmas. Consider, if you will, the first one. Joseph had plans for the future. He was going to marry a nice girl from a good family, build his carpentry business, and have lots of strong sons of whom he could be proud. The first one he would name for himself, Joseph. And he would groom that eldest son to one day inherit the family business. Yes, Joseph had a plan. But then, life got in the way. Several weeks or months before the wedding celebration to his betrothed Mary, he found out that she was pregnant. And an angel appeared in a dream to him and said that he was going to have a child, but it would not be named Joseph, it'd be named Jesus. And that child would not make his reputation as a carpenter and inherit Joseph's business, but would save his people from their sins. Joseph's neat little plan was getting very messy very fast. First off, he and Mary had not known one another in the biblical sense, so the news of her being in a family way was problematic. You see, Joseph and Mary had been engaged to be married, which at that time was as good as being married as far as the community was concerned. At least twice in the Old Testament, being betrothed or engaged is equated with being married. Now, in our current culture, It is not unusual for an engaged couple to live together or have children together before they're actually married. And if an engaged couple decides to not go through with the wedding, well, the most difficult result is often the notifying of the guests and family and the returning of the gifts. In fact, nothing is considered final by the state until the marriage license is signed. But in first century Palestine, once a man and woman were betrothed to one another, their commitment was considered legally binding. Mary belongs to Joseph, and for all practical purposes is his wife in every way, except that they do not live together, and they certainly do not sleep together until the actual wedding celebration is held. So when Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant, he believes that she has broken the marriage covenant, and according to the Old Testament law, he was required to have her and her presumed lover stoned to death. But as Matthew describes him, Joseph is a righteous man who does not want to submit Mary to public disgrace, so he decides to dismiss her quietly. This will be a challenge, though, since the engagement would have been a very public one. But Joseph seems to decide that whatever difficulty is involved will be worth it to save Mary's reputation and her life. But the angel convinces Joseph to buck up and go through with the marriage. His plan has changed. The road before him is suddenly uncertain. How will they address the questions? Will he be able to help raise a child with such a strange background? What will become of them if the community does not believe their story? In spite of Joseph's questions and fears, a baby is coming, and he's going to have to help Mary prepare. So he makes a new plan. We'll have the baby here at home, he might have said, and then we'll get on with life as if nothing happened. Mary will be comfortable in her home, and all the family members will be around to help with the newborn and to care for Mary as she goes through labor. There'll be lots of familiar faces to help out afterwards, too, and with the baby and with the housework, and Mary will be able to rest up. It'll all be beautiful. It'll all be beautiful. But, of course, that's not how the story goes. Joseph and Mary have to travel to Bethlehem for the census, and that's a trip that would have been difficult for a woman as far along in her pregnancy as Mary was. And then Joseph's desire to have the child at home, surrounded by family and friends and buoyed by the support of their community, went right out the window when, while in Bethlehem, Mary goes into labor. Joseph's neat little plan is getting messier. So it was incredibly important that Joseph find them somewhere comfortable and safe where he could help Mary give birth. There was an inn nearby, and that would do just fine. But again, that plan goes off the rails when the innkeeper informs Joseph that there was no room for them that night, except for the little stable around back. But if they cared to make a reservation for the following week, we have lots of room. Then I imagine Joseph tried to drop the famous relative card. He was, after all, a descendant 26 generations removed from the great King David. Do you know, sir, who I am? The unimpressed innkeeper replied, really? Wow, that's really too bad, because the third cousin of the Emperor of Rome was by just a few minutes ago, and he left you a message, though, and you can find it in the little stable around back. Do you want it or not? What could he do? Had no choice. This child that had not even been a part of the original plan was going to come this night. And again, not according to plan, he was going to be born miles away from familiar and safe surroundings in a dirty cattle shed. Instead of family and friends to help and watch over them, there would be mules, cattle. Where the cries of childbirth should have been accompanied by soothing words and prayers, they would instead be mingled with the chaotic sounds and smells of barnyard animals. This was not Joseph's plan. But in spite of all that, and in the midst of scary and strange circumstances, a baby was born to Mary and Joseph that night. The hay-filled manger in that little stable provided a perfect place for a newborn child to sleep. And his birth was greeted with the songs of angels. And the new little family was kept company by the shepherds who had heard the news while they were watching over their flocks in the fields nearby. These unexpected circumstances were far, far from what Joseph had planned, but God used them to fulfill God's plan. See, that's the way God works sometimes. Aaron Klink writes that this story reminds us that unexpected things, things outside of convention, can often be wonderful signs that God is at work. At Christmas, we often try so hard to make things perfect. The right decorations, the perfect gift, family harmony, and a Christmas morning straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. But we do the same thing the rest of the year, too. We make plans for our lives and we long for perfection, whatever that is. And when things go off the rails or turn in a direction that we wouldn't choose for ourselves, we can sometimes feel lost and afraid. I can't help but think that for Joseph and for Mary, when their plans changed so drastically, that they both felt out of control. They both felt a little angry, and probably they felt a sense of grief for what they had lost when their plans changed, and a great fear of the unknown for what lay ahead. John Lennon once wrote that life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. And whether they are Christmas plans or career plans or college plans or life plans, our plans can and do change. And those changes can leave us feeling out of control and angry and afraid and sad. But being a disciple means trusting in God's plan, even when it doesn't mesh with our own. It means trusting that God, even when we can't see very far down the road to where God's plan is heading. That's what faith is. What played out that first Christmas night was not Joseph's plan, but it was God's plan. And through that plan, God acted to break into the world of human history in a dramatic way, reaching into our humble, chaotic existence to show us what love really looks like. And though the way things shook out was not according to Joseph's plan, things ultimately worked out pretty well for the world. For in the life, death, and resurrection of this little child born on that dark night so many years ago, in the most humble circumstances imaginable, God acted to reconcile us to God and to one another. Through this plan, God moved to save us from ourselves, to remind us that there's more to this existence than the struggle to maintain our own well-being. In the Christ child, we learn that God's love for us is so great that God willingly lets go of the trappings of divinity and eternity to embrace life as one of us, to teach us what it means to be children of God and brothers and sisters in Christ. And when Joseph and Mary set out on their journey together, they had no idea where it would take them. And as we set out on our journeys, neither do we. The road before us is a mystery, but we walk that road confident in God's presence beside us and in God's willingness to lead us where we need to go. When the journey gets weird, when the unexpected happens, when we find ourselves in uncharted territory, facing challenges for which we feel unprepared, we keep walking, knowing that God is leading the way, confident in God's great love for us, most perfectly expressed in the unexpected, unbelievable, and completely unplanned for birth of a little child. To God be all glory, honor, power, and dominion in this world and in the world that is to come.